You need it to be okay. Daddy,
Don't save me.
I'm gonna make this right.
By the time the bus started sliding off the bridge, the rain had already turned the whole road into a trembling sheet of silver. Parents were running, children were screaming. Somebody kept yelling for a rope. Somebody else was praying out loud. And in the middle of all that noise, through a shattered window framed with broken safety glass and rainwater, one little girl looked straight at her father and whispered, almost gently, "Daddy, don't save me." Then the bridge groaned, and Daniel Mercer did the one thing every sane person standing there knew would kill him. He ran toward her. Nobody in Belmere ever called Daniel brave before that night. They called him stubborn, quiet, difficult sometimes. The kind of man who fixed things with his hands because words had stopped working for him years ago. Since his wife died, most people only knew him in fragments. The single dad with grease under his nails, the guy who left the auto shop past midnight, the father who never missed a school pickup unless a transmission was open on his workbench and he was elbow-deep inside it. But if you had watched him with his daughter, you would have seen the truth immediately. Daniel Mercer lived like a man being kept alive by one heartbeat that wasn't his own. Her name was Ellie, 11 years old, big brown eyes, too observant for her age, the kind of child who noticed when adults were pretending to be okay and let them keep pretending because she loved them enough not to expose it. She still packed her own lunch because, after her mother died, Daniel burned toast so often it became a household joke. She still left sticky notes on the coffee maker. "Drink this before speaking to humans." She still took the long route through the grocery store because she knew her father would freeze for half a second in aisle 7, where her mother used to argue with him about which pasta sauce was actual food and which was lazy sadness in a jar. They were not a polished father-daughter story. They were messy. Late fees, wrinkled school permission slips, takeout containers in the sink, unspoken grief in the walls. Daniel forgot picture day twice. Ellie pretended not to care. Ellie got in trouble once for punching a boy who said her mother must have left because living with your dad seems depressing. Daniel was called into the school office and sat there, staring at the principal's desk, trying to decide whether parenting required him to scold her or thank her for aiming at the nose. He did both. That was their life. Imperfect, tender in strange places, held together with routine and love, and the quiet terror of losing more than they could survive. Ellie's mother, Nora, had died 3 years earlier in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and broken promises. An undetected clot, the doctors said. One of those cruel, stupid medical sentences people use when they have no language for why the wrong person is gone. Daniel had been there holding her hand. Ellie had been asleep at home with a fever, and Daniel would spend the rest of his life hating that he had not been in 2 places at once. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and advice. "You have to be strong for her. Children are resilient. Time heals." Daniel learned very quickly that none of those things helped at 2 in the morning when Ellie woke from a nightmare and ran to his room whispering, "I forgot her voice." So he became the kind of father grief makes, hypervigilant, fierce, overprotective in ways he tried to hide. He checked locks twice. He drove slower when Ellie was in the car. He kept emergency snacks, 2 flashlights, a first aid kit, jumper cables, a phone charger, a blanket, and an inhaler in the truck, even though Ellie hadn't had a serious asthma episode in over a year. He also loved a bridge most people in town ignored. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. The old Red Hollow Bridge sat at the edge of Belmere like a tired bone. Rust at the bolts, hairline fractures under the side rails. A structure too old for the traffic it carried and too neglected for the storms it endured. Daniel knew that bridge because he had done contract welding for the county years before Nora died. He knew which plates had been patched instead of replaced. He knew which inspection got delayed, then delayed again, then turned into paperwork that made everything sound safer than it was. He complained, more than once, at town meetings, in emails, in a signed letter with photos attached. The county sent back the same smooth language every time. No immediate structural threat. Scheduled for review next fiscal cycle. Thank you for your concern. Concern. That word stayed in Daniel's mouth like metal. Ellie used that bridge every weekday on the school bus. And every weekday, Daniel watched it swallow the yellow bus and spit it out on the other side. And every weekday, he told himself fear was not prophecy. The day it happened was a Thursday in late October. Rain had been falling since dawn. Not soft rain, not romantic movie rain. This was hard, slanting, relentless rain that battered windows, drowned gutters, and made the town feel smaller with every hour. By noon, the local station warned about flash flooding. By 3, half the roads near the creek were under watch. Parents started calling the school, but dismissal went ahead anyway, because Belmere was the sort of place that pretended routine could overpower danger. Daniel was under a truck when his phone buzzed. It was Ellie. He slid out, wiped his hands, and answered on the second ring. "Hey, Bug." "Don't call me that in public," she said automatically. "You're on the phone. No public." He could hear voices behind her, the shuffle of kids loading onto the bus. "You ate lunch?" he asked. "Half." "Why half?" "The pizza was committing crimes." He smiled despite himself. "I'll alert the authorities." There was a pause. Rain hammered the garage roof. Then her voice got smaller. "Dad?" Something in him straightened instantly. "Yeah?" "The bridge looks weird today." He walked toward the shop door and looked out at the storm. "What do you mean, weird?" "I don't know. The water's really high. Mr. Blevins said we'll be fine, but the bus kind of bounced when we pulled up." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Ellie, listen to me. Tell the driver I'm coming. Tell him not to cross." "Dad, everyone's already getting on." "Ellie." She fell silent. She knew that tone, the one without room for negotiation. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell him." "I'm leaving now. Stay off the bridge." He didn't even clock out. He just grabbed his keys and ran. The drive from Mercer Auto to Red Hollow usually took 12 minutes. Daniel made it in 7. The rain turned the windshield into a blur. Wipers thrashed uselessly. His truck fishtailed once near Miller's Bend, and he corrected without breathing. Halfway there, Ellie called again, but the signal cut before he could hear more than, "He said," then static, then nothing. By the time Daniel reached the final stretch of road, traffic was already backing up. He saw hazard lights, a crooked line of stopped cars, parents stepping out into the rain, faces pale with something deeper than confusion. Then he saw the bridge, or what was left of certainty. The school bus was hanging half off the side, front end pitched down over the raging creek below. One rear wheel still clung to the broken roadway. The rest of the bridge had split open beneath it, asphalt jagged and tilted, guardrail peeled away like paper. Water frothed under the gap, brown and violent, carrying branches, trash, pieces of someone's fence. Children were pressed against the windows, crying, beating on the glass. Someone screamed, "My baby's in there!" Daniel didn't remember parking. 1 second he was inside the truck, the next he was in the rain, running. He heard people shouting after him. "Don't go out there! The bridge is coming down! Wait for rescue!" But rescue wasn't there. All Daniel could see was Ellie near the back of the bus, one hand against the window, face pale, hair plastered to her forehead. The rear section had twisted, seats had torn loose. One metal support had buckled across the aisle. She was trapped below it, pinned at the legs. Beside her, a little boy from the first-grade row was sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. Daniel slammed his palm against the glass. "Ellie!" Her face changed the second she saw him. Fear first, then relief so raw it almost broke him. "Dad!" The bus shifted. Everyone on the road gasped. Daniel climbed the fractured pavement, boots slipping, fingers grabbing at rail posts and chunks of wet concrete. The rain hit so hard it stung. One wrong step and he would go through. He knew it. He also knew there was no force on earth strong enough to stop him. At the emergency panel near the rear door, he yanked, kicked, and wrenched until the half-jammed exit burst open. Water and school papers spilled out into the storm. Inside, the air smelled of gasoline, mud, and panic. Children were crying everywhere. "Everybody who can move, come to me!" Daniel shouted. His voice was different in a crisis. Sharper, commanding. It cut through terror. 2 older kids stumbled toward him. He grabbed them one by one and pushed them toward the opening where parents and a deputy had formed a line to pull them out. Then he moved deeper into the bus. A girl with a bloody eyebrow. A boy screaming for his shoe. Another child stuck between seats. Daniel dragged, lifted, shoved, ignoring the glass slicing his hands, ignoring the water pooling around his boots, ignoring the whole impossible angle of the bus beneath him. Then he reached Ellie. Her legs were trapped under the folded steel frame of a torn seat assembly. Beside her, little Benji Keller, 6 years old, Superman backpack, one front tooth missing, was wedged sideways and hyperventilating so violently his lips had begun to turn gray. "Daddy," Ellie whispered. "I'm here." He dropped to his knees, grabbed the twisted frame, and pulled. It didn't move. He pulled harder. Tendons stood out in his neck. The metal gave him nothing. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Too far. Way too far. Daniel assessed everything in a flash. Pinning point, weight distribution, rising water below the floor seams, fuel leak from the front, the way the bus tilted more with each shift in current. He could maybe free one child fast. Maybe. Benji was easier to reach. Ellie understood that before he said anything. And that was the worst part. The way her eyes changed, not with fear for herself, but with the awful maturity grief had taught her too early. She looked at the little boy beside her, then back at her father. "Save him first," she said. "No." "Dad." "No." Benji let out a choking sound. His chest hitched. Ellie grabbed Daniel's wrist. Her fingers were freezing. "Listen to me," she said, voice trembling now. "He can't breathe." Daniel's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He looked at Benji. looked at the metal, looked at his daughter. "I'm getting both of you out." The bus groaned again, lower this time, deeper, like something massive had begun to give way. Ellie started crying, but she kept her voice steady. "Daddy," she swallowed. "Don't save me." He stared at her, as if he had misheard. Outside, thunder cracked over the valley. She shook her head, tears mixing with rain and dirt. "If you keep trying, we all die. Please. He's little. He's scared." "No," Daniel said again, but this time it barely sounded like a word. Her mouth trembled. "I already lost Mom. I can't." She broke, inhaled sharply, then forced the rest out. "I can't have you die because of me." That sentence went through him like a blade. Because of me. There it was. The secret children bury when adults are too broken to notice. The guilt. The poisonous, quiet belief that love is a burden and being saved comes at a cost. Daniel had spent 3 years thinking he was protecting her from loss. He had never realized she was protecting him right back. He cupped her face with both hands, rain dripping from his hair into his eyes. "Look at me," he said. She did. "You are not the reason I bleed. You are the reason I get up. Do you understand me?" She was shaking too hard to answer. "I'm your father," he said, his voice cracking now. "There is no world where I walk out of here and leave you." Benji gasped again. Daniel closed his eyes for one fraction of a second, then moved. He twisted sideways, braced one foot against the bus wall, and hauled the edge of the bent seat just enough to free Benji's shoulder. The boy came loose with a cry. Daniel grabbed him and shoved him toward the older kid still near the exit. "Take him! Go!" Hands reached in, pulled Benji out. The bus lurched. A scream rose from outside. Daniel nearly lost his balance. Ellie cried out as the metal crushed harder against her ankle. From the road, Deputy Hanson shouted, "Mercer, get out now! The front axle's slipping!" Daniel looked toward the exit, toward the daylight, toward the line between survival and surrender. He could still leave. He could tell himself he had saved who he could. He could live the rest of his life carrying the sound of her voice. He could become a man who kept breathing after that. For one horrifying second, he understood that this was the choice. And then that understanding turned into rage so pure it erased everything else. Not at Ellie, not even at fate, at every paper-pushing coward who ignored the bridge reports, at every calm official statement, at every lazy delay that let Rust win, at a world that kept asking ordinary people to accept unbearable things as if acceptance were strength. Daniel climbed out of the bus. Several people on the road started sobbing in relief, thinking he had finally come to his senses. He didn't. He sprinted back to his truck. "What are you doing?" Hanson yelled. Daniel yanked open the truck bed and dragged out the heavy tow chain he always carried for stranded vehicles in winter. Mud splashed up his jeans. Rain blinded him. His hands moved on instinct, fast, brutal. Sure. He looped one end around the rear frame of the bus as far as he could reach, then ran the other end back to the truck hitch. "Mercer, stop!" Hanson shouted. "If that bus goes, it takes you with it." Daniel turned, soaked to the bone, eyes burning. "Then pray faster." He jumped into the truck, reversed onto the broken approach until the rear tires nearly hit the fractured edge, and gunned the engine just enough to pull tension into the chain. Metal snapped taut with a shriek that cut through the storm. The bus jolted, but it stopped sliding. For a moment, impossible as it was, the whole world held still. Daniel threw the truck into park. Another man grabbed his arm. "You can't go back in there." Daniel tore free. "Watch me." This time, when he ran to the bus, the chain was singing under strain, his truck shuddering against the weight. One failure point, one slip, one snapped link, and everything would disappear into the flood. Inside, the bus had tilted farther. Water seeped through the flooring. Ellie's breathing had gone shallow with pain. Daniel dropped beside her and reached into his jacket pocket. Ellie blinked through tears. "What are you doing?" He pulled out the folding utility knife he used at the shop. Not much. Barely a tool at all against twisted steel, unless you knew where to use it. The seat frame wasn't pinned at the thickest bend. It was jammed where a torn mounting bracket had hooked under the base support. Daniel wedged the blade into the torn vinyl, sliced through seat padding, reached deeper, found the trapped belt assembly and insulation blocking the release point. His fingers slipped in blood and rainwater. He cut anyway. The bus groaned. Outside, somebody yelled that the truck was moving. Daniel didn't look. "Dad," Ellie whispered. She sounded exhausted now, frighteningly small. "Stay with me." "I'm trying." "You don't try. You do." A weak laugh escaped her despite everything. That sound nearly killed him more than the bridge. He shoved the knife deeper, found leverage, and ripped away enough padding to expose the bent bracket. Then he braced his shoulder under the frame and pushed with everything he had left. Something cracked. He didn't know if it was metal or bone. The bracket gave half an inch. Enough. "Pull your leg!" he shouted. Ellie screamed and yanked. Nothing. Again, harder. The bus dropped another inch, chain shrieking. Daniel roared, not a word, just raw human sound, and drove upward with his whole body. This time the metal lifted. Ellie's leg came free. He grabbed her under the arms and dragged her toward the exit just as the rear windows exploded inward from the twist. Water surged in. The truck outside let out a horrible mechanical howl as its rear wheels began to slide. People were screaming his name. He shoved Ellie toward the opening. Hands caught her. Then the chain snapped. The sound was like a gunshot. The bus lurched violently forward. Daniel was thrown backward into the aisle as the entire front end dropped. For one dizzy instant, he saw everything sideways. Gray sky, brown water, broken seats, a lunchbox floating past his face. Then the bus plunged. Cold, brutal, total. The river swallowed him whole. He slammed into something underwater, lost all sense of up and down, opened his mouth by accident, and inhaled filth. The current twisted him through broken glass and loose backpacks. He grabbed blindly, found nothing, kicked, hit metal, kicked again. Somewhere above the roar, a memory surfaced. Nora, laughing in the kitchen, flour on her cheek. Ellie, at age 6, asleep on his chest. The sticky note on the coffee maker. Drink this before speaking to humans. He was not dying here. He was not leaving his daughter to grow up with a second empty chair. Daniel clawed toward light. When he finally broke the surface, he was 20 yards downstream and barely conscious. The river smashed him against a half-submerged log. Hands reached from the bank. Hanson, 2 parents, someone else, and dragged him onto mud and weeds while he coughed up water so hard his vision blackened. The first thing he did when he could breathe was try to stand. "Ellie," he choked. "Where's Ellie?" A voice answered before anyone else could. "I'm here." He turned. She was wrapped in a deputy's rain jacket, limping, crying, alive. Daniel made a sound no language really has. Relief, pain, disbelief, gratitude, all of it at once. He reached for her, and Ellie threw herself onto him so hard they both nearly fell back into the mud. He held her, like something stolen had been returned. She buried her face in his neck and sobbed. He could feel her whole body shaking. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "No, never say that. Not for surviving. Not for being worth saving." "But you almost—" "I know." Her mouth trembled. "I didn't want to lose you too." That was it. The truth. Tiny, devastating, honest. Daniel pressed his forehead to hers as the sirens finally arrived, as paramedics rushed in, as rain kept falling on the wreckage and the ruined bridge, and all the people standing there, stunned by what they had just seen. "You won't," he said. "Not while I can fight." In the weeks after, Belmere stopped pretending the bridge collapse was an accident no one could have seen coming. Photos surfaced. Inspection delays. Budget diversions. Emails unanswered. Daniel's old complaints were suddenly discovered by reporters who found it convenient to act shocked. County officials held press conferences with solemn faces. The words, thoughts, and prayers got thrown around so often they started to sound obscene. Daniel hated every second of it. He hated the cameras outside the hospital while Ellie got scans on her ankle. Hated the way strangers called him a hero when all he had done was refuse to let his child become another framed picture on a shelf. Hated how people nodded with moist eyes and said, "I don't know how you did it," as if love were some rare talent instead of the oldest instinct in the world. He testified anyway. Not because he wanted attention, because fury, when it survives grief, sometimes becomes purpose. At the county hearing, Daniel stood with his arm in a brace and scars still healing across both hands. He spoke for 11 minutes. No theatrics, no polished lines, just truth. About warnings ignored, about the cost of delay, about children riding over rust because fixing things isn't politically glamorous until the screaming starts. The room was silent when he finished. 3 officials resigned within the month. The bridge was demolished before winter. Ellie healed slower than the doctors expected, not physically, but inwardly. She had nightmares again for a while. So did Daniel. Sometimes thunder sent both of them still as statues. Sometimes they ate dinner in total silence. Because surviving something huge does not instantly give you wise words. Sometimes healing looked embarrassingly ordinary. Cartoons on the couch, reheated macaroni, sitting on the garage floor while Daniel sorted bolts and Ellie passed him the right wrench just to keep his hands busy. One night, about 4 months later, he found her standing in the kitchen, staring at her mother's old recipe box. "What's wrong?" he asked. Ellie didn't turn around. "Do you ever think Mom would be disappointed that we're okay sometimes?" Daniel leaned against the doorway. It was such a child question, and such an adult one. He answered carefully. "No. I think she'd be furious if we stopped trying to be." Ellie nodded like she was filing that somewhere important. Then she asked, "Did you hear me? On the bus?" He knew what she meant. Not the words, the meaning beneath them. "Yes." "I didn't mean," she struggled. "I didn't mean I wanted you to let me die. I just thought if you stayed, and then you died too, it would be my fault." Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. When your mom died, he said quietly, I spent a long time believing I should have found some way to stop it. That if I had been smarter or faster or better, maybe. He exhaled. Grief lies to you. It makes you think love gives you control. It doesn't. It gives you responsibility. It gives you courage, but not control. Ellie looked at him with those same old wise eyes, only softer now. So it wasn't my fault? No. And if you had died saving me? He placed a hand over hers. It still wouldn't have been your fault. She started crying then. Not violently, not like on the bridge. Just the quiet kind that comes when a child finally sets down something too heavy to carry. Daniel pulled her into him. Outside, rain tapped faintly at the windows. Not a storm this time, just weather. By spring, Belmere had built a temporary crossing and planted white flowers near the old bridge site. People called it a memorial. Daniel didn't love memorials. They always seemed to ask the living to stand very still around pain, as if motion were disrespect. Still, on the first warm Saturday in April, he drove Ellie out there. The creek was calm now. Sunlight flashed over the water like nothing bad had ever touched it. Ellie stood at the railing of the overlook and watched the current for a long time. Then she slipped her hand into her father's. You still hover, she said. Daniel glanced down. What? At school, at crosswalks, in parking lots. If a squirrel looks at me wrong, you make a face like you're preparing for war. He tried not to smile. Failed. Occupational hazard. You're a mechanic. Same thing. She laughed. A real laugh. Easy, bright. For a moment, Daniel just listened to it. There are sounds that prove life has returned to a house. A kettle, a drawer closing, a kid laughing when they had once forgotten how. I know you were scared, Ellie said after a while. Daniel looked at the creek. I was terrified. You still came. He swallowed. That's the deal, he said. That's what parents are. Terrified people who show up anyway. Ellie leaned against him. I'm glad you did. He kissed the top of her head, the same way he used to when she was small enough to carry asleep from the car to her bed. The sun lowered. The water kept moving. And Daniel understood something then that grief and fear had hidden from him for years. Saving someone is not always the moment you drag them out of danger. Sometimes it's later. In kitchens, in hospital rooms, in the 1,000 ordinary conversations where you teach them they were never too much to love, never too expensive to protect, never the reason something broke. Sometimes the real rescue is convincing the person you love that their life does not need to be bargained for. As they walked back to the truck, Ellie squeezed his hand twice. Their old signal. I'm here. He squeezed back. Me too. And maybe that was the whole story in the end. Not the bridge, not the river. Not the headlines or the hearing or the town finally waking up after Steele had already screamed. Just a father and a daughter, both carrying ghosts, both learning that love is not proven by dying for each other, but by living through what almost destroyed you and refusing to let guilt write the rest. Daniel opened the truck door for her. Ellie climbed in, then looked up at him and said, Pancakes tomorrow? He smiled. with illegal amounts of syrup. She nodded solemnly. Good. I almost died. I deserve that. He laughed then, a full laugh, surprised by it, rough around the edges and real. And as he circled to the driver's side, with the spring air cool on his face and his daughter alive behind the glass, he thought how strange it was that the heart can break, and still find room to hold gratitude. He started the engine. The creek glimmered in the mirror behind them. Ahead, the road was open. If you were in his place, what would you have done?